The first light of dawn was just creeping over the dense rainforest hills of Golfito, Costa Rica on May 13, 2001, when a local watchman noticed something pale on the side of a dirt road near the old airstrip. As he approached, the shape became heartbreakingly clear. The motionless body of a young woman lay sprawled on the ground. Her clothes were soaked in blood, and one of her sandals had been flung off in what looked like a violent struggle. Torn black fabric scraps clung to her clenched hand. The watchman's heart pounded. He recognized her face from around town. It was Shannon, the sweet American student who had been staying with the Porras family up the road. In the soft grey dawn, under the heavy tropical air, the reality set in. Shannon Martin was dead, and it wasn't an accident. It was something far more sinister. "23-year-old Shannon Lucille Martin grew up in Topeka, Kansas. Even as a kid, she was always the one outside catching frogs or climbing trees, completely in love with nature. In high school, she was an honors student and class leader, known for her warmth and adventurous spirit. She went on to study biodiversity and ecology at the University of Kansas, KU, where her curiosity for tropical plants bloomed into a full-blown passion. In early 2000, Shannon got the chance to study abroad in Costa Rica. She spent a semester in the small port town of Golfito on Costa Rica's southern Pacific coast, working on a research project about rare ferns that grow high in the rainforest trees. Golfito enchanted her. The lush jungles, the close-knit community, the way everyone walked everywhere and greeted each other. To her, it felt like a second home. She even called her host parents in Golfito her Costa Rica mama and papa, Odette and Marcial Porras. They adored Shannon as if she were their own daughter, and she loved them dearly in return. When her semester ended, Shannon left Golfito, but part of her heart stayed behind in that friendly little town by the bay. Back in Kansas, Shannon excelled in her senior year. By spring 2001, she had completed all her coursework and honors thesis requirements. She was just weeks from graduating with honors in ecology and evolutionary biology. But Shannon wasn't one to leave a job half done. She had been studying a certain epiphytic fern, a fern that grows on trees, and she was determined to collect one last batch of samples from Costa Rica to make her research publishable. So she did something ambitious. She arranged to take all her final exams early so she could squeeze in a quick return trip to Golfito right before graduation. She squeezed this trip in, her faculty advisor Craig Martin recalled, marveling at her drive. Shannon flew to Costa Rica on Thursday, May 10, 2001, eager to spend about a week in Golfito, gathering that critical plant data she needed. She was set to walk in KU's commencement the following Sunday, just a week later, degree completed, future wide open. When Shannon stepped off the plane in Costa Rica, it must have felt a bit like coming home. This was her second time in Golfito, and many locals still remembered the friendly blonde researcher from the year before. She stayed again with the Porras family, in a simple cabin near the edge of town, not far from the small airstrip. Right away, Shannon plunged into her work, hiking into the forests by day to find those rare ferns, pressing plant samples, scribbling notes in her journal. She also made time to catch up with old friends in town. Golfito may have been economically depressed, a once booming banana port still recovering from the fruit company's pullout years earlier. But it was rich in camaraderie and tropical beauty. Shannon cherished this about Golfito: the easy pace, neighbors stopping to chat, mangoes and papayas abundant at the market, the warm evenings when everyone would gather outdoors. As a long-time vegetarian and nature lover, she felt totally at ease living the Tico life, eating fresh pineapple and rice and beans, walking everywhere or riding rusty bicycles, and breathing in that humid jungle air. On the night of May 12, 2001, Shannon decided to take a break from research and enjoy Golfito's nightlife with friends. It was a Saturday night, and the Jurassic Bar, a little local disco, was the place to be. One can imagine the scene: neon palm tree lights, the thump of Latin dance music, bottles of imperial beer clinking, and rain drumming on the tin roof. It was the rainy season after all. Shannon spent the evening at Jurassic Bar, dancing and laughing with a few other students and locals. To everyone around, she was just a carefree young woman enjoying her last weekend in a town she loved. Sometime around midnight, Shannon said goodnight to her friends at the bar and headed home on foot. It wasn't a long walk, roughly a quarter-mile from the bar to the Porras family's house, mostly along the road skirting the small airstrip. But it was dark. The road had no street lights, and tall grass and trees pressed in on either side. As Shannon walked, the music and chatter of the bar faded behind her. The night was humid and moonless. One can imagine her sandals scuffing on the gravel and her eyes adjusting to the darkness, maybe thinking about the flight she'd catch in a few days, or the Mother's Day gift she planned to give Odette Porras the next morning. May 13th was Mother's Day. She was nearly home. The Porras house was only about 30 to 40 yards away now, when something or someone emerged from the shadows. What happened in the next moments is known only in fragments gathered later, but it was clearly a nightmare. Without warning, Shannon was grabbed from behind and put in a candado chino, a chokehold headlock so tight it's locally nicknamed the Chinese lock. She must have screamed or tried to, but a strong arm pinned her neck. Another assailant, perhaps, came at her from the front with a knife. Shannon fought ferociously for her life, that we know from the evidence. She scratched and struggled so fiercely that she managed to rip off pieces of the attacker's clothing with her bare hands. But the attacker, or attackers, had the cruel advantage of surprise and weapons. In the darkness by the airstrip, Shannon was stabbed again and again. Later, the autopsy would count approximately 13 to 15 stab wounds on her arms, abdomen, and neck. The knife punctured her lungs, her stomach, her throat. The violence didn't stop even when she fell limp. Forensic examiners determined that several of the stab wounds were inflicted after Shannon was already dead. It was a frenzy of rage or fear, or perhaps, chillingly, just cold-blooded evil. The assailants fled into the night, leaving Shannon bleeding on the roadside, just shy of the warm haven of her host family's home. When Shannon failed to return home by the wee hours, her host parents must have sensed something was wrong. Odette Porras likely spent a sleepless night checking the window, hoping to see Shannon's silhouette coming up the path. But it was only at first light that the truth emerged. Around 5 a.m., a local security guard near the airstrip discovered the gruesome scene: a young woman lying in a pool of blood, with no signs of life. He quickly alerted the authorities. Police from the Organismo de Investigación Judicial, OIJ, Costa Rica's investigative police, arrived and secured the area as a crime scene, though by then a light rain might have begun to fall, threatening to wash away evidence. The Porras family rushed out only to face an unimaginable sight: Shannon's lifeless body, brutally stabbed, left on the ground just a couple hundred feet from their home. Odette and Marcial Porras were overcome with grief and guilt. Those poor people. It happened almost in their backyard, Shannon's mother would later say of the Porras family's trauma. Investigators worked the scene that morning, searching for any clues to identify Shannon's killer. They noted the obvious signs of a fierce struggle: broken fingernails, bruises, and those black cloth fragments clutched in Shannon's hand and scattered around her body. It appeared the victim had torn pieces from a black t-shirt with white lettering during the fight. Police did not find a murder weapon at the scene. They also noticed something peculiar. Shannon was only wearing one earring. The other was missing, possibly ripped off in the attack. Could robbery have been a motive? Her wristwatch and other belongings were still on her, but maybe the attackers snatched the earring as they fled, or perhaps it fell off and was taken later. It was too early to tell. There were no eyewitnesses present in the dark stretch where the crime occurred, and in 2001, this rural town had no surveillance cameras on the streets. In other words, the police had a blood-soaked body and a few physical clues, but no obvious suspect right away. Golfito is a small town. News travels quickly, even bad news. By mid-morning on May 13th, word of Shannon's murder spread, casting a pall of shock and fear over the community. People were horrified that such a violent crime could happen in their peaceful corner of Costa Rica, especially to a beloved foreign student who many knew as a friend. Some locals quietly suspected a trio of known troublemakers in town, a few individuals with shady reputations, but initially few dared to speak up. Fear set in. Whoever did this might do it again, and potential witnesses were already looking over their shoulders. As later would be revealed, the witnesses had fear of telling what they knew because they were threatened. That's right. Early on, there were rumors that anyone who talked about what they saw or heard that night might face retaliation from the killers. In a tight-knit but economically depressed place like Golfito, where everyone knows everyone, that kind of intimidation is chilling. It started to feel like a conspiracy of silence might smother the investigation. Back in the United States, Shannon's family and friends were plunged into grief. Imagine getting that phone call. Shannon's mother, Jeanette Stauffer, recalls that on Mother's Day 2001, of all days, she received the devastating news that her daughter had been murdered abroad. The Martins had to endure the agony of retrieving Shannon's body and bringing her home to Kansas. 1 week after her death, KU posthumously awarded Shannon her bachelor's degree in a somber commencement ceremony. She had earned it after all, a brilliant student whose life was cut short just days before she could walk down the graduation aisle. Her research advisor, Dr. Craig Martin, vowed to help publish the Fern study that Shannon had nearly completed, calling her a rising star who was just a joy to be around. The shock of her slaying rippled through the University of Kansas community and made headlines in Kansas papers, but initially, details were scarce. KU student slain in Costa Rica, the news reports said, noting she was attacked while walking home from a disco. The US Embassy in San Jose confirmed the basic facts and that Costa Rican police were investigating. No suspects were immediately identified in those first days. Jeanette Stauffer, however, was not about to sit back and wait. From the moment she learned of Shannon's death, Jeanette's life mission became finding her daughter's killers and bringing them to justice, no matter the obstacles, no matter how long it took. This determined mother from Topeka would soon be at the forefront of the investigation, pushing Costa Rican authorities, hiring private investigators, and even organizing goodwill projects in Golfito to honor Shannon. But in May 2001, Jeanette was thrust into a foreign criminal justice system with a language she didn't speak and procedures very different from the US. There was no jury trial in Costa Rica. Cases were decided by panels of judges, and the process could move slowly. Still within a few weeks of the murder, Jeanette flew down to Costa Rica to meet with investigators. It was the first of many such trips she would make. The OIJ detectives in Golfito were working hard, but leads were hard to come by initially. They sent the crime scene evidence for forensic testing, the blood, the fabric scraps, etc. Shannon's injuries indicated possibly more than one attacker. The chokehold and the multiple stab angles suggested at least 2 people involved. The brutality also hinted it might not have been a simple robbery. It felt personal or frenzied, yet nothing obvious in Shannon's life pointed to a personal enemy in Golfito. She hadn't been involved in any disputes. She was universally liked. So investigators considered the robbery angle. Maybe someone targeted her as an easy mark, a foreigner walking alone at night to steal jewelry or money. Yet aside from the missing earring, her valuables were intact. It was puzzling. By interviewing locals quietly, OIJ agents started hearing some whispers. There was talk of a local woman who had been seen with a ripped shirt on the morning after the murder, acting very nervous. There was also talk of a taxi driver who may have picked up suspicious passengers near the crime scene that night. Bit by bit, a picture was emerging that pointed to a few individuals. Jeanette, impatient for progress, hired 2 retired Kansas law enforcement officers to assist. Kansas Bureau of Investigation Assistant Director Larry Thomas and another investigator named Jesse Ibarra flew down to Costa Rica at her behest. They worked with the OIJ, offering fresh eyes and resources. Jeanette even offered a reward of up to $50,000 for information, a huge sum in Costa Rica, hoping to flush out reluctant witnesses. She was essentially funding and fueling an investigation across borders, an extraordinary effort by a grieving mother. The first real breakthrough in the case came a few months after the murder. Investigators discovered that a gold earring matching Shannon's missing one had turned up at a pawn shop in a different town. In Punta Arenas, a city several hours away, a pawnbroker recalled that 2 women had come in trying to pawn a gold hoop earring not long after the murder. The earring looked like the kind Shannon was described as wearing, and forensic analysis later confirmed it had traces of Shannon's DNA, likely from being torn from her ear. This was a huge clue. Who were those women pawning the earring? The pawn shop worker, Carmen Maria de la O, remembered that one of them was a local Golfito woman named Katia La Panteonera Cruz. La Panteonera, which oddly means the grave robber, was Katia's nickname in town, not exactly reassuring. Katia Cruz Murillo was a familiar figure to Golfito police. She was a 28-year-old drifter, reportedly struggling with drug addiction and living a vagabond lifestyle. Police had questioned her in the initial investigation, but didn't have enough evidence to hold her. Now, with the pawned earring linking her to Shannon's belongings, suspicion of Katia grew strong. In November 2001, about 6 months after the murder, Costa Rican authorities arrested Katia Cruz as a main suspect. This was a significant moment, the first arrest in Shannon's case. Katia was placed in preventive detention, pretrial jail, which under Costa Rican law can last up to 12 months, and in special extensions up to 18 months, without formal charges. She adamantly denied killing Shannon. Some wondered, could this slight, troubled woman really have overpowered Shannon alone? It seemed likely she hadn't acted alone. Indeed, investigators were already on the trail of 2 other suspects, both men. One of those men was Luis Alberto Castro Carrillo, known locally by the nickname Caballo, the horse. Luis Castro was around 32 to 38 years old at the time. Reports vary. One later said 38. He was a resident of Golfito with a reputation for thuggery, not someone with a steady job or good standing, more like a street tough. Crucially, not long after Shannon's murder, some townspeople noticed that Caballo had fresh scratch marks on his neck and face. When asked about it, he casually claimed he had cut himself shaving with a razor. But these scratches looked more like fingernail gouges, exactly the kind of marks a victim might leave on her attacker during a desperate fight. That detail spread quietly through the community grapevine and certainly reached the ears of investigators. Between Katia's connection to the pawned earring and Luis Caballo Castro's suspicious scratches, and likely other intelligence the police gathered, the authorities were closing in on the puzzle. The third person of interest was an older man named Rafael Coco Zumbado Quesada, about 47 to 52 years old. Coco Zumbado was another Golfito local with a checkered past. Some described him as a neighborhood busybody or petty criminal. It's not entirely clear how he was linked, perhaps by association with Katia and Luis. They were known to hang out together. Or perhaps through witness accounts like that elusive taxi driver's story. Remember the taxi driver? Investigators learned that on the night of May 13, 2001, a taxi driver named Esteban Madriz Acuña had reportedly picked up 2 individuals near the crime scene and driven them to a gas station. At that gas station, an attendant allegedly noticed those passengers washing blood off their hands in the restroom sink. That startling tip, if true, directly implicated at least 2 people fleeing the scene. The description of the passengers pointed to a woman and a man, likely Katia and Castro, whose known hangout was near that area. And who was driving them? The taxi man, Madriz. But fear paralyzed him. He went into hiding in San Jose, terrified to come forward after presumably realizing he might have driven the killers. Police had his name and even a photo, but could not locate him initially. For the time being, the case would have to proceed without his live testimony, relying instead on the circumstantial evidence piling up against Katia, Luis, and Rafael. In July 2002, over a year after the murder, Costa Rican authorities finally arrested the other 2 suspects, Luis Castro, Caballo, and Rafael Zumbado, Coco. The trio of alleged perpetrators was now in custody, at least briefly. Katia had been behind bars since late 2001, but Luis and Rafael, after a short detention, were granted conditional release after a few months in custody. By late 2002, essentially, they were out on bail but had to sign in and were monitored by authorities, who deemed them not to be flight risks. This conditional freedom for two suspected killers alarmed Jeanette Stauffer, and frankly, it alarmed the US Embassy and KU officials too. However, it's how the system worked. Unless prosecutors filed formal charges within certain deadlines, defendants could not be indefinitely jailed without trial. Jeanette's worst fear was that the case would stall and the suspects would walk away unpunished. By late 2002, about 17 months after Shannon's death, Jeanette felt the investigation was losing steam. She made her third trip to Costa Rica in October 2002 to prod the authorities and keep the case alive. She met with anyone who would listen: police officials, prosecutors, even US diplomats. "I've been told by many government officials in the US and Costa Rica that I have to stay vocal, stay visible, and let them know I'm not going away," Jeanette told a reporter. And stay vocal she did. That fall, KU itself stepped in to help. The university's chancellor wrote to Costa Rican President Abel Pacheco, and Pacheco responded, assuring that the government was committed to seeing the cruel murder of Shannon Martin solved as quickly as possible. Costa Rica didn't want to be seen as a place where students get killed and nothing is done. It was bad for its reputation as a safe, eco-tourism haven. In fact, after Shannon's killing, KU had temporarily closed its study abroad program in Golfito out of safety concerns. This long-running exchange, since 1962, was halted, which deeply upset Costa Rican academics and officials. There was pressure from all sides to solve this case. By early 2003, the investigation had progressed enough that prosecutors were preparing to file formal murder charges against the three suspects. But the clock was ticking. Katia's 18-month preventive detention limit was about to expire in March 2003. If charges weren't filed by then, she'd be released from jail pending trial. A scenario Jeanette couldn't bear. In March 2003, Jeanette flew to Costa Rica yet again. This time she held a press conference in San Jose, literally begging for action. She arrived with a portfolio of Shannon's photos and pleaded to the media for justice. She highlighted that March 20th was the deadline to indict, otherwise Katia, the principal accused, would go free. "I'm desperate. I fear this violent crime could go unsolved," she told the Associated Press in an interview. In that same appearance, Jeanette took an extraordinary step. In coordination with the local prosecutor, she publicly revealed the identity of the taxi driver witness, Esteban Madriz, and implored him to come forward. This was a risky move. Usually witnesses are protected, but they were out of options. "I am pleading with the taxi driver to please come forward," she said, acknowledging he might be scared, but urging him to help. By going on TV news broadcasts with a Spanish voiceover translation, Jeanette broadcast her message across Costa Rica's evening news that week. She reminded everyone of the $10,000 reward still on the table for information leading to a conviction. "Our family is desperate and scared that this is not going to be solved," she admitted on air. The media pressure worked. Within days, on March 19th, 2003, Costa Rican prosecutors officially filed murder charges against Katia Cruz, Luis Alberto Caballo Castro, and Rafael Coco Zumbardo. The three were indicted together, accused of co-participation in the stabbing death of Shannon Martin. If convicted, authorities said, they could face 20 to 35 years in prison under Costa Rican law. Jeanette breathed a cautious sigh of relief. At least now there would be a trial, and Katia would not be freed for lack of charges. However, the case was still largely circumstantial, as she well knew. The taxi driver Madriz had not been found yet, and without his eyewitness testimony, the prosecution was relying on evidence like the earring, the fabric scraps, and witness recollections of suspicious behavior. Jeanette worried that might not be enough to convince judges beyond a reasonable doubt. Nonetheless, the wheels of justice were finally turning. Over the next several months, both sides prepared for trial. In Costa Rica's system, a preliminary hearing was held in April 2003 to confirm there was enough evidence to proceed. At that closed hearing, Judge Daniel Moran heard arguments from the prosecutor, Eric Martinez, and the defense attorneys for Katia, Luis, and Rafael. Jeanette was allowed to participate as an auxiliary prosecutor, effectively a party to the case, representing the victim's interests. In mid-April, Judge Moran ordered that all 3 suspects would indeed stand trial for homicide. A trial date was set for the fall in Golfito's small courthouse. Jeanette's persistence had paid off so far, but there was a long way to go. October 2003. More than 2 years after Shannon's death, the murder trial began in Golfito. The courtroom was modest. This wasn't a big city courthouse, but a local tribunal in a port town that rarely saw international attention. 3 judges would hear the case. Costa Rica has no jury trials for serious crimes. Presiding was Judge Vinicio Castillo, joined by judges Edwin Duarte and Juan Carlos Peralta. From the outset, the trial faced a hiccup. On the scheduled start day, a defense attorney conflict caused a delay. One lawyer had previously represented Katia and then switched to represent Rafael without proper consent, forcing a short postponement so Rafael could get a new attorney. Jeanette, who had flown down yet again for the trial, was frustrated by even a minor delay. "I'm totally disappointed, but we'll stay until it restarts," she told AP on that day, and restart it did by late October. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. On one side sat the accused, Katia Cruz, the slight woman with a long black ponytail and an alias that gave people chills, Luis Caballo Castro, a stocky man who often stared at the floor, and Rafael Coco Zumbado, the older man with greying hair and anxious eyes. On the other side was Jeanette Stolfer, clutching a photo of Shannon, supported by a legal team and representatives from the US Embassy observing the proceedings. The prosecution was led by Eric Martinez, the Golfito prosecutor who had doggedly built the case with Jeanette's help. And importantly, Jeanette herself was not just watching. She was called as a witness, since Costa Rican law allowed her to testify and also to formally join the case as a co-accuser. She took the stand early on, likely to speak about Shannon's character, her reason for being in Costa Rica, and the impact of this loss. Crucially, the heart of the trial was the witness testimony and evidence tying the suspects to the crime. Given the lack of direct eyewitnesses to the stabbing, these pieces had to create a compelling puzzle that the judges could not ignore. One of the most important witnesses was Rosibel Muñoz. Her name was also reported as Rosibel Núñez in some accounts. Rosibel was a local woman who knew Katia. She bravely testified, but not without drama. Just before she was about to take the stand, someone made a menacing phone call to the court, saying that if Rosibel testified, she would be killed. This was an outright death threat, likely meant to scare her silent. The judges took it seriously. They cleared the courtroom and allowed Rosibel to give her testimony behind closed doors for her safety. Imagine that. The courtroom doors sealed, the public and press kept out, as this key witness gathered her courage to speak. Rosibel then recounted a damning observation. She had seen Katia Cruz on the night of the murder wearing a black t-shirt with white letters, and the next morning, Katia was still wearing what looked like the same shirt, but it was ripped and tied in a knot. Rosibel recalled asking Katia if she'd heard about the American girl's death, and Katia appeared very nervous, trembling, with her shirt noticeably torn and hastily knotted around her torso. Later, when Rosibel learned that police had found black fabric pieces at the murder scene, she realized they matched Katia's shirt, the very shirt she'd seen Katia wearing, now ripped to shreds. In fact, a forensic analysis showed that the fragments of cloth found clenched in Shannon's hand were from Katia's distinctive Los Angeles black tee. Rosibel's testimony directly placed Katia at the scene of the struggle. As Juan Carlos Arce, Jeanette's Costa Rican lawyer, told the press, Rosibel involucrates one of the accused, Katia, directly in the case, by identifying those cloth pieces. It was powerful evidence. Next came testimony about the earring. A woman named Saidi Hernandez took the stand, albeit nervously. Saidi admitted that she had been the companion who went with Katia to pawn the gold earring in Punta Arenas. She basically served as an intermediary. She, Katia, gave me the earring and I pawned it. They gave me 500 colognes, Saidi confessed in court. 500 colognes. That's roughly $1. That's all Shannon's life was worth to the killers, in a way. Saidi's testimony corroborated the pawnshop evidence and tied Katia to possessing Shannon's earring after the murder. Moreover, the pawnshop clerk Carmen de la O had already given a statement recalling that the item pawned matched the description of Shannon's jewellery from news photos. A written resolution from a higher court later noted Carmen's identification. The earring pawned coincided with the earring that, according to newspaper photos, the victim wore at the time of being murdered. So even though Carmen might not have testified in person at trial, her earlier statements were part of the case file. All arrows pointed to Katia trying to profit from Shannon's belongings immediately after the crime. Other witnesses also chipped in pieces of the puzzle. 2 individuals testified that shortly after the murder, they noticed Luis Caballo Castro had fresh scratches on his neck, and they remembered him giving the feeble excuse about a razor cut. This supported the idea that Shannon had clawed him during the attack. Unfortunately, the taxi driver Esteban Madriz never appeared in court. Despite searches and pleas, Madriz remained hidden, so the judges could not hear directly from the one person who might have seen the suspects fleeing. However, other witnesses, possibly the gas station attendant or second-hand accounts, established the taxi story. That Cruz and Castro were reportedly the duo seen taking a cab that night with blood on them. The judges allowed some of this as evidence, and also permitted the prosecution to keep looking for Madriz during trial. They even ordered the OIJ to continue trying to track him down as the trial proceeded, but by the time of verdict, he never surfaced. The forensic evidence was also presented in painstaking detail. In a dramatic session on November 19, 2003, the prosecution played the video of Shannon's autopsy in court. It was a harrowing piece of evidence. On screen were the graphic wounds inflicted on a vibrant young woman, now lifeless. Shannon's mother Jeanette likely had to steel herself during that moment. The autopsy confirmed the pattern and number of stab wounds, approximately 14, and likely showed how at least one was delivered after death, indicating excess brutality. The medical examiner no doubt described defensive cuts on Shannon's arms, consistent with her fighting back. Combined with the crime scene photos of blood spatters and the torn shirt fragments, the video underscored the savagery of the crime. One can imagine the judges' faces, seasoned Costa Rican jurists, grimly absorbing these facts. After a trial spanning 6 days over a few weeks, it wasn't continuous day-to-day due to scheduling. The case neared conclusion. By late November 2003, it was time for closing arguments. Prosecutor Eric Martinez did not pull punches. He asked the court to convict all 3 defendants of homicidio calificado, the most serious form of homicide under Costa Rican law, akin to first-degree murder with aggravating factors, and to impose the maximum sentence of 35 years for each. He argued that the cruelty of the killing showed a level of premeditation, or at least viciousness, that merited the highest penalty. Costa Rican law at the time allowed up to 35 years for aggravated murder. Since the death penalty is not available there, 35 years is effectively a very heavy sentence. The prosecution also symbolically asked for just $1 in civil damages to Shannon's family, a token amount to acknowledge their loss without putting a price on a life. The defense attorneys, of course, insisted there was reasonable doubt. They likely pointed out that no one actually saw the stabbing. That much evidence was circumstantial, and tried to cast blame elsewhere. Perhaps they hinted at a mystery fourth person, a classic reasonable doubt tactic. They surely emphasized that no clear motive was proven. Why would these people kill Shannon? Indeed, that remained a perplexing question. Jeanette herself later conceded, "I can't find a motive for my daughter's death." But she agreed with authorities that robbery was at least part of it. In any case, motive is not a required element to secure a murder conviction, but the lack of it can make judges hesitate to apply the harshest category of murder without proof of pre-planning or particular vicious intent, like ambush or sadism. On November 24, 2003, the 3-judge panel delivered their verdict. The courtroom filled up that day. Locals, journalists, US embassy staff, all gathered to hear the fate of Katia, Luis, and Rafael. Jeanette sat holding a picture of Shannon, her heart pounding. Judge Vinicio Castillo read the decision. Guilty, guilty, not guilty. Katia Cruz and Luis Caballo Castro were each found guilty of Shannon's murder, but on the lesser charge of homicidio simple, simple homicide. Rafael Coco Zumbado was acquitted due to insufficient evidence tying him to the actual killing. The judges made it clear they weren't proclaiming Zumbado innocent in their hearts, but by law they could not convict him on the scant evidence against him. In fact, Zumbado broke down in tears of apparent relief, or perhaps guilt, upon hearing he was absolved. Meanwhile, Katia and Luis stood silent and emotionless as the guilty verdicts were announced. Judge Castillo went on to explain the rationale. There were fuzzy details and unanswered questions about motive, he noted, which prevented the court from elevating the crime to qualified homicide, homicidio calificado. We don't have a crystal ball to tell us what each one was doing at the scene. No elements to sustain that they intended to kill her from the start, nor what the motive was, Castillo said in essence. Because treachery or premeditation, known as alevosía, couldn't be proven, they treated it as a second-degree type murder, an intentional killing, but without aggravating factors proven. Under Costa Rican law then, homicidio simple carried a maximum of 15 years, minimum of 12. The judges decided on the maximum 15 years for each, emphasizing that the brutality warranted no less. The way they killed a young, studious, happy person, the way she was stabbed, we believe they don't deserve the minimum 12 years, Judge Castillo said firmly, insisting on the full 15. He added, for those reasons, we are convinced that Katia was very close to Shannon when she died, underscoring how the evidence placed her at the scene. Castillo stated unequivocally, we know that Katia and Luis Alberto killed Shannon. This is clear. Those words at least vindicated Jeanette's efforts to identify her daughter's killers. However, the sentencing itself was a blow to the family. 15 years. For brutally stabbing someone 13+ times and snuffing out a life full of promise. Jeanette was openly distraught. She stood in the courtroom clutching Shannon's photo and wept tears of frustration. Why only 15 years for a violent crime? She cried out. They took my little girl's life. This is almost like a slap in the face. To Jeanette, and many Americans, 15 years for murder sounded like a shockingly light sentence. That's roughly equivalent to what some get for manslaughter in the US, not a premeditated murder. But in Costa Rica, due to the legal technicalities, that was the outcome of this initial trial. Jeanette wasn't alone in her sentiment. Even the Costa Rican prosecutor had hoped for more. Yet at that moment, at least 2 of the perpetrators were convicted and behind bars, and that was a significant victory considering the obstacles. Katia and Luis were led away in handcuffs to continue their incarceration. Both had been jailed through the trial. Luis had been rearrested once convicted, since he'd been out on conditional release until then. As for Rafael Zumbado, the third suspect, he walked out of court a free man that day. The judges said their acquittal of him was because lack of evidence made it impossible to convict him in good conscience. Interestingly, Zumbado didn't walk totally free into the sunset. At the time, he was actually already in custody, preventive prison, awaiting trial for an unrelated stabbing murder from 2002. Yes, in a dark twist, within a year after Shannon's murder, Zumbado had allegedly killed someone else in similar fashion, according to police. That certainly raises eyebrows. Perhaps if he truly was involved in Shannon's case, karma or justice caught up with him eventually via another case. But officially, in Shannon's case, he was not convicted. Jeanette, though dismayed by the sentences, was not about to give up. The trial verdict was not the end of the legal road. Costa Rica's system allows both defense and prosecution to appeal decisions, and appeal they did. Over the next few years, a complicated battle played out in the appeals courts, Sala 2 and Sala 3 of the Supreme Court. Jeanette spearheaded an effort to get the convictions upgraded to the higher charge and thus lengthier sentences. In 2004, an appeals tribunal did just that. They changed the conviction to homicidio calificado on appeal, essentially agreeing that the cruelty and circumstances warranted the higher classification. As a result, in 2004, Katia and Luis's sentences were increased to 30 years each. For a moment, Jeanette felt vindicated. "There is fairness in Costa Rica, and I knew justice would prevail," she told the Tico Times after that appeal win. But the legal saga wasn't over. The defense lawyers fought back, taking the matter up to the Sala 3, Supreme Court's penal branch. In October 2005, Sala 3 annulled the 30-year sentences on a procedural issue. It turned out 2 of the 3 appellate judges who had imposed the 30-year terms had also been judges in the original trial, a violation of rules. Judges can't essentially review their own decision. So the High Court threw out the sentences, though crucially not the convictions themselves, and ordered a new sentencing hearing with a fresh panel. This was another rollercoaster moment for Jeanette. She found herself once more flying to Costa Rica, attending hearings, addressing judges. By her count, by late 2006, she had been to Costa Rica 13 or 14 times since Shannon's death, an incredible testament to her dedication. "I need to be a voice for Shannon in this," she told reporters, explaining why she kept returning for every proceeding. Finally, in April 2006, a new sentencing hearing convened in the town of Pérez Zeledón. They moved it away from Golfito, possibly for a change of venue. This time, both Jeanette and the 2 convicts had a chance to speak to the judges. Luis Caballo Castro remained defiant to the last. He still proclaimed his innocence and had the audacity to say he hoped Jeanette would come back to Costa Rica and beg my forgiveness when I'm proven not guilty. Katia Cruz, in contrast, appeared remorseful, at least somewhat. She apologized and asked Jeanette for forgiveness, though notably she stopped short of admitting to the killing. She implied that she herself didn't strike the fatal blows. Perhaps in her version she was just present or played a lesser role. We can't know for sure since she never fully confessed. Jeanette listened, but it likely rang hollow after all the evidence of Katia's involvement. The judges on this 2006 panel took into account not only the facts, but also the convicts' attitudes, as is allowed in Costa Rican jurisprudence. In April 7, 2006, they delivered a new sentence. Luis Castro's prison term was increased to 35 years, and Katia Cruz's sentence was reaffirmed at 30 years. Essentially, they decided that Castro, who showed no remorse and continued to deny responsibility, deserved the absolute maximum, 35 years, for homicidio calificado, whereas Katia would receive 30 years, slightly less but still the high end. Jeanette expressed satisfaction with this outcome. The judges listened intently and made their decision based on the facts and the attitude of the convicted killers, she noted, praising the fairness of the process. For Jeanette, it was validation that persistence in the courts could yield justice. Still, she admitted, "I'm not happy. I believe in the death penalty. But I'm glad the appeals court upheld the lower court's decision," she said, meaning she was at least glad they upheld the conviction itself through all the appeals. In Costa Rica, 35 years is effectively a life-equivalent sentence. At that time, sentences could be cut by parole or other reductions, but both Katia and Luis would be in prison for a long, long time. Yet, yes, there's one more yet. The defense tried one final appeal to the Sala 3. Finally, in May 2008, 7 years after the murder, the Costa Rican Supreme Court's penal chamber issued the definitive ruling. They confirmed the murder convictions and the sentences. However, there was a slight twist. The Sala 3's final resolution cited 30 years for each of the 2 convicts for homicidio calificado. This appears to solidify a 30-year term for Katia and possibly standardize Castro's sentence to 30 as well. Reports differ on whether his remained 35 or was adjusted. A report by La Nación suggests both got 30 in the final tally. In any case, the convictions were final. No further appeals. With this resolution ends a judicial process that required 3 trials, wrote La Nación. Indeed, it felt like 3 trials: the original 2003 trial, the 2004 appeal trial, and the 2006 resentencing trial. At last, the legal chapter was closed. By 2008, Katia Cruz had already been behind bars for nearly 7 years. She never left prison since her 2001 arrest. Luis Castro had been jailed since 2003 after his conviction. He had a brief period of freedom before trial, but was locked up once convicted. Both would remain incarcerated likely until the late 2020s or beyond, depending on any parole or sentence reduction policies. Costa Rica has no death penalty, no life imprisonment, and typically the maximum time anyone serves even for multiple crimes is 50 years by law. So 30 to 35 years was among the toughest punishment available. Jeanette Stauffer, having spent at least $220,000 of her own money and incalculable emotional energy on this fight, finally could breathe a sigh of relief that Shannon's killers were held accountable. The immense effort had taken a toll. She suffered from long bouts of depression after Shannon's murder. But in seeing the process through, Jeanette also found a path to healing and purpose. One remarkable outcome of this tragedy was the bond that formed between Jeanette Stauffer and the community of Golfito. Despite losing her daughter there, Jeanette did not turn her back on the town. In fact, she did the opposite. She invested in it. During the long investigation, as early as 2002, Jeanette had started plans to establish an English language and computer center in Golfito in Shannon's memory. With help from the US Embassy and local authorities, she secured space at the Costa Rican Coast Guard station in Golfito to host the school. In February 2004, the Shannon Martin English Language Center opened its doors, offering free English and computer classes to Golfito residents, from teens to Coast Guard cadets, to improve their job opportunities. Jeanette said her goal was to honor Shannon by bringing opportunity to the people of Golfito, an economically struggling town. And the people responded. They embraced the school wholeheartedly. Within months, dozens of students were learning English. By mid-2004, the first class of students graduated from the program. The community even rallied to support the school with fundraisers. In one instance, students reopened an old closed movie theater to host film showings, selling popcorn to raise money for the center's computers. One local English teacher expressed pride in how dedicated the students were to making the most of this opportunity. This positive legacy helped transform the narrative in Golfito from one solely about loss into one about hope and friendship. Despite the pain we encountered in this canton, the love that Shannon always transmitted to them was greater, wrote a Costa Rican reporter, noting how Shannon's friends and mum decided to stay and continue her legacy in that community. The English Centre thrived and was still operating years later, with multiple graduations of local residents gaining new skills. In a way, Shannon's love for Golfito lived on through those classes, and the people bettering themselves. Golfito itself did not forget Shannon. The porous host family, heartbroken at her death, built a beautiful memorial next to their home, about 200 feet from where her body was found. It's a white-tiled altar topped with a cross and 2 flower vases, with a plaque that reads, KU Study Abroad Student Shannon Lucille Martin, December 30th, 77 to May 13th, 2001. Nestled among tropical plants, it stands as a gentle reminder of the young woman who once called the Porrases Mama and Papa, and who loved their town deeply. Other KU students who visited Golfito after 2001 often stopped by that memorial. One student who stayed with the Porrases in 2002 said the family and Shannon's local friends had a lot of fond memories about Shannon. Golfito's a great town with wonderful people. That is the image of Golfito that Shannon herself had, and that her mother helped preserve. In Kansas, Shannon's friends and family kept her memory alive too. They established the Shannon L. Martin Foundation, a non-profit to support the English school and fund other educational initiatives. Through the foundation, Jeanette and volunteers raised money for computers, secured donated software from Microsoft, and encouraged US businesses in Costa Rica to contribute. The foundation's website remembers Shannon as a bright, compassionate young woman who always loved to travel, who cared about animals and the environment, and who could make friends wherever she went. She truly bridged 2 cultures in her short life. Yet some unresolved questions linger in the Shannon Martin case. Officially, the motive was never resolved in court. Why did Katia, Luis, and possibly Raphael attack Shannon that night? On that point, we have only theories. Jeanette and authorities leaned toward robbery. Shannon's mother noted that robbery was part of the motive, according to investigators, even if it doesn't explain the ferocity of the attack. Katia trying to pawn the earring for drug money fits that scenario. Perhaps Shannon was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and these individuals decided to mug her, then panicked when she fought back. Or it might have been that the assailants were high on drugs, given Katia's and possibly Castro's drug problems, and attacked her in a deranged state for kicks or out of some grudge against foreigners. We simply don't know. The case did leave a mark on US-Costa Rican relations in terms of student travel. The KU exchange program stayed closed for some time. There was a sense of caution about Costa Rica, a country generally known for safety, in the wake of Shannon's death. It was a reminder that even in the Switzerland of Central America, bad things can happen. Costa Rica, keen to maintain its image, worked hard to show that justice was done. In the end, it took 7 long years, but they did uphold those convictions. Jeanette's relentless advocacy was a big reason why. As her attorney had said early on, a committed parent in this type of case can make a difference. She's kept this investigation alive. Indeed, without Jeanette, it's possible Shannon's case could have gone cold or unsolved. Instead, it became a landmark example of determination, a mother who refused to let her daughter be forgotten. Today, more than 2 decades later, Shannon Martin would be in her mid-40s. Her peers have built careers, perhaps families. One imagines Shannon might have become a respected biologist, maybe working in a rainforest or running a botanical garden. She once dreamed of creating her own botanical sanctuary. While that future was stolen, Shannon's impact in the world persists. In Golfito, students at the English Centre continue to speak her name with gratitude. In Topeka, her family continues to honour her memory through the Foundation's work. Each year on May 13th, one can be sure Jeanette lights a candle for her little girl who loved the jungle. In the end, the murder of Shannon Martin is a story of heartbreak, but also of community and perseverance. It's the story of how a devastated mother, an island of resolve, navigated a foreign legal system and with the help of 2 nations, ensured that killers were put behind bars. It's a story that warns of the real dangers that can lurk even in paradise, but also one that shows how acts of goodness can rise from the ashes of tragedy. Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you're interested in global solved murder cases like this one, consider giving us a follow. We'll be releasing 2 episodes a week. See you next time.